Are we live, Katie?
Yes, we are now live.
Thank you very much. Welcome everybody to the April meeting of those watching us through the Council's YouTube streaming channel. We have only one item this evening, but I'll run through the agenda items before we get to that. Apologies for absence and substitutions. We have a couple of substitutions, but no apologies for absence. Councillor Gary Busuttil will be replacing Councillor John Ball, and Councillor Joanna Dabrowska will be replacing Councillor Seema Kumar. I'm not aware of any urgent matters. Are there any declarations of interest from members of the committee?
No. Yes, Chair. Councillor Anand here.
Yes. Yes, Praveen?
Hello?
Yes.
Councillor, yes. I'd just like to, for the record, state that I have a lease premises on Boston Road, but I don't think that will affect my property.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not aware of any matters to be considered in private. Minutes of the last meeting, slightly unusually, there's been an update to the draft minutes from those originally appended to the documents submitted. The amended draft minutes were circulated to members of the committee today, and those amended draft minutes are those which are to be seen on the website attached to the agenda for this meeting. The change essentially is a slight expansion of the account of the contribution of the objector who spoke on one of the items at the last meeting. Other than that, the minutes, I think, are as originally submitted. Can I take those minutes as being agreed?
Sorry, Councillor Donnelly, it's Councillor Stafford. Can I raise
Yes.
a point? The objector has raised a number of what she feels are omissions to the minutes, and having read them myself, I agree with her. So, for example, there's no mention of the tall buildings, the density design, the lack of the environmental impact assessment, which were all things that she raised, and therefore were all things that were considered by the committee in their refusal. I do think those things should both be recorded in the part which has the objection and in the reasons for refusal as well, because clearly this is a controversial decision, one that potentially the council may have to defend in terms of an appeal, and unless we capture all the objections, I think we risk not giving ourselves the strongest foot to stand on if we have to defend an appeal on this.
Okay, I hear what you say. There was correspondence between the objector and Democratic Services earlier today, or over the last day or two, part of which resulted in the amendment, so I understand it, that has been put forward. As has been explained to the objector, these minutes are not meant to be a comprehensive record of what was said, either by objectors or by individual members of the committee in their contributions. And on that basis, I think what we have in front of us is a perfectly reasonable summary. As someone who was at that meeting, for me, it is a fair summary of what was put forward, as indeed is the summary of what was said by members in the debate and the reasons given, the formal reasons given and captured at the end of the meeting for the refusal on that particular item. So I would resist the notion of tinkering further with the wording of the minutes, but ultimately, of course, it's a matter for the committee Would anyone else care to comment on the minutes?
Chair,
Councillor Raywall.
yes, thank you, Chair. Just to help, Greg, I think the actual objections are the ones that are summed up at the end, not necessarily what the objector says at the beginning, as Steve has said, really. And it helps the council's case to be more concise at the end, Greg, than it is to have a scattergun approach. So I'm just trying to say that I'm quite happy with the refusal and the reasons for, and we should go ahead on that basis, really.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wish to speak on that? Okay, well, I'm going to propose that the minutes that we have in front of us are taken. So anyone wish to formally vote against that?
Yes, I want to vote against it because I do feel we need to add in at the end the extra points that were raised by the objector as reasons for that. So that's why I'm voting against.
Okay, anyone else?
I will support Councillor Stafford in the fact that the points outlined by the objector should be highlighted.
I just want to know if you're voting against, Joanna.
No, I'm voting against it, but for the principle, just to resolve it, Chair, is to maybe add the objector's speech as has that been done before, where the minute taker takes our speeches.
Well, I'm not. I've moved that the minutes be taken as they are, so I don't want any further speeches on the subject. So you're also voting against the minutes or in favour of the amendment as Councillor Stafford has put it. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to take the minutes then as agreed, as submitted. Thank you very much. Moving us on, site visit attendance. As people know, we've not been making site visit attendance, site visits during the pandemic. It takes us on to the substantive item of the evening, 75 to 117 Boston Road, Hanwell, W7 3SA. Just before I ask Greg Gray to introduce it, myself, members of the committee, have been, and indeed still are, receiving emails concerning this. I hope members of the public will understand that emails that come to us very late in the day can't be expected to have had the same consideration as things that arrived, in at an earlier time. And just for clarity, for one or two of the emails that I get, the council hasn't made this proposal. The planning committee is considering an application made by a third party. It's not a proposal by the council, and we're considering this application in the way that we would always do, and are obliged to do so, and we will do so in our normal fashion. Greg, will you introduce the application, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. Sever, if you put the first slide up, please. He is here, Chair, because I've just been just messaged him, so I know that he's around. He said he was going to be able to do that for me.
He did join.
Yes, he has joined, yes. And I'm sure he can hear us talking as well.
Excuse me, sorry, I don't have the permissions to share my screen for some reason.
The permissions are set up correctly, so if you want to just...
Yep, I'm getting it now, Katie, sorry. It's coming up.
We had it briefly and it disappeared again.
That's it, you have it now, Sever. Are you able to maximise the screen, please, Sever, or is that the maximum size on your... And it might be helpful, Sarah, if you were able to move the image up a little bit, if it's possible. We may miss the bottom of it. Well, that will do. Let's do it. We'll deal with this. So thank you, Seva. So if you just put the first screen up, the slide up, please, Seva, the site plan, and I'll talk to that. So this is an application for a minor material amendment application under Section 73 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 in connection with a mixed residential-led scheme which proposes 360 flats with commercial and office use on the site of the former Wickes store, which on this plan is the large rectangle, and an adjacent site, a Nissan car dealership that's marked garage. The Wickes store is allocated as a development site in the development sites development DPD. And forms part of Hanwell Centre, town centre. The Nissan site is not. Next screen, please, Seva. Thank you. This application follows the grant of permission 191309. Sorry, that should be 301, which was granted in September 2020. And just by way of background, there was an initial planning permission, which is arrowed by the red lines, permission 177284, granted in 2018 for 283 flats with associated commercial development, and it relates to all three of the buildings arrowed there. The subsequent permission granted in 2020 came about as a result of the applicant's acquisition of land to the rear of the Nissan store, and an additional block was added as indicated by the blue line, and then the other block fronting onto Boston Road was increased in height. Thank you, Seva. If you move on to the next screen, please. So this gives effectively this site layout, which forms the extant planning permission with retail units and residential in Block A, with Blocks B and Block C in residential use. Next screen, please. As I explained just now, this is an application for a variation of the extant planning permission. So the bottom left-hand image is the layout pursuant to the extant planning permission for 333 flats and associated commercial development, parking, etc. And then the image to the bottom right shows the material changes by way of additions to buildings. I'll come on to the external traces in a minute, but the key, as it were, physical changes to the buildings that would be manifested by the development would be an increase in height of the three fingers that you can see on the images there. The one to the left and the one in the middle will be increased by 1 story to 8 stories, and the one on the right will be increased by 2 stories, bringing it to 9. And then you can see that the key components of the scheme that remain unchanged are the site area, but it's a residential-led scheme that proposes 35% affordable housing. It still contains the same commercial and office mixture. The layouts of the buildings, separation distances from neighbours are maintained. The external design and appearance is unchanged, as is access and parking arrangements and open space and play space provision. And then the changes from the extant permission, which are indicated in the schedule on the right, an increase in the number of flats by 27, so that would raise from 333 to 360, increased story heights, as I've just outlined, increased proportion of London affordable rental units. I'll explain that in a little more detail later. And then external changes to the buildings, increased car parking, and the relocation of the electricity substation. Next slide, please, Seva. So this broadly outlines the open space and the parking arrangements within the scheme. As I said earlier, the arrangements of ground floor and podium amenity space and open space remain unchanged from the permission. Now, because the site is the same size as it has been consistently throughout this, then there is a consequential shortfall in the amount of play and communal space for the additional residential units, and that's reflected in the increased amount in the Section 106 contribution requested. The applicant has nevertheless sought to maintain the ratios of play space within the scheme, within the outline, within the extant permission. So 0 to 4-year-old play space remains at 100%, 5 to 11 at 75%, and 12 plus at 0%. But as I say, there has been a shortfall in the amount of overall communal space to provide the additional play space. And then car and cycle parking, blue badge parking, and electric vehicle charging points have all been increased in proportionate size to the increase in development. Car parking has not increased in the same proportion, in that there is a 30% parking provision in the extant permission. The increase, because it's actually 5 spaces short of the standard, is a 29% increase. Transport consider that shortfall in car parking to be acceptable, provided all other parking provision, as I said, blue badge, EV and cycle parking meet standards, which they do. Next slide, please, Seva. So this schedule, I don't know if you can see the whole page. This schedule basically explains the proposed breakdown in the residential accommodation. The top left table and the table below that, with the colouring, both appear in the report. And I know that there has been perhaps some difficulty in navigating the coloured table, because it seems to suggest that there are changes in the dwelling mix. And I need to emphasise that those percentage figures that are given are the proportionate differences because of the increase in the number of units. In broad terms, the dwelling mix remains the same. The area in which changes have been made significantly are shown in red, which is that the number of one bed 2 person and 2 bed 3 person shared ownership units has been reduced in favour of larger family units, 2 bed 4 person and above. And indeed, that is a key component of the change in this application. And that doesn't arise simply because of the increased amount of development proposed, which is the extra 27 flats, but because the applicant has been through the scheme and has generally improved the offer accordingly. So the breakdown for the additional units is 9 affordable units, 3 shared ownership, 6 London affordable rent, which in percentage terms, 35% by units, 37.7 by HAB rooms, is still consistent with the extant permission. And then there are 18 market units, 1 bed and 2 bed, 10% remain wheelchair accessible. And then you have the grand totals there. And then the table at the bottom right, and I notice there's a column missing, so please bear with me. But if you look to there would have been on the left-hand side a column that gave you the bedroom sizes of each of the units, starting at 1 bed and then going all the way down to 4 bed at the bottom. And those figures then give you rental percentages, both as a percentage of local housing allowance and as a percentage of market rents. This is for the London affordable rent units. And just so we're clear, this includes service charges. So the figures in there show that this is still within the general 40 to 65% allowable within the Mayor's SPD. And I should also remind members that this is, of course, the mix that is contained in dwelling terms within the extant planning permission. So what you see here is, in effect, what the applicant would be providing in any event if he carries out his planning permission, for example, if members not minded to approve the application tonight. So next slide, please, Seva. And this gives this image here on the left-hand side in the different colorations shows you visually the arrangement of the tenures within the scheme, so that you can see Block A comprises a mixture of shared ownership in purple and affordable rent in green, whilst Block B comprises a combination of mainly market units. But you will notice, if you compare the 2 middle columns, that there's been a slight increase in the number of shared ownership units within Block B as a result of the additional floors. Block C remains as it always has been, as an affordable rent arrangement. Next slide, please, Seva. And then, as I said, there are various changes externally to the buildings, and these images all appear in the committee report, Chair, and I think they're exceptionally well presented in terms of their visibility. They are taken straight from the applicant's submission, so it was perfectly clear to anyone looking at the drawings what the intended changes were, and in the main they relate to changes to window arrangements, shop front arrangements, extra windows moved, and taking account of requirements of the fire strategy, and even down to such things as the position of drainage pipes and the position of balconies. So this is effectively, the intention here is to provide a development that would then be built without any further modifications to design. Moving on to the next slide, please, Seva. And then this is the image for Block B, which shows that not only are there some external changes to window positions and balcony positions, but also showing the increase in story height. If you look at the image on the top left, that's in reverse. So what you have then in effect is on the left-hand side, you have the block on the north side, which is the extra single story, and then the block in the middle with the single story, and then the block on the south side, adjacent to Jasper Avenue and the fire station, the extra 2 stories, and then the changes that are consequent on that. Next slide, please, Eva. And then this image gives you a comparative increase in story heights as a result of the additional stories, showing you the additional heights. So there's an extra single story, there's a 3.15 metre increase in the height of the blocks. And then, not unsurprisingly, where there's a 2-story increase at the end, there's a 6.3 metre increase in the size of the blocks. And I emphasise yet again, this relates only to Block B. Next slide. And then this is a summary from the applicant's updating of the daylight sunlight assessment. So what he did was he took the assessments that have been conducted previously and then rolled them forward into the new scheme to see what, if any, additional impacts there were. A headline point, looking through those numbers, really at the end of the day is that there are no new properties that are affected by the development that were not previously affected, but there are some increase impacts on certain properties which were previously identified, and they're listed there. I won't go through them all. The key point, though, is that for the majority of properties assessed in Maunder Road, Montague Avenue, Boston Road and Lower Boston Road, they continue to meet BRE guidelines for daylight and sunlight. And I emphasise guidelines, Chair, because as members know, guidelines are to be applied flexibly, as I've said before. And then with regard to the additional impacts, and I can explain what VSC and NSL and APSH are in more detail if members would like, but nevertheless, the key headline point to take away from this is that the impacts generally affect more secondary windows and at levels of daylight and sunlight loss which are comparable to the extant permission. And then move on to the next slide, please, Sarah. This image is a comparative one which shows the site at the entrance from Maunder Road to Brownell Place. Brownell Place flats showing on the left-hand side of the scheme. So you can see on the left-hand image that for which planning permission exists, and then on the right-hand side you can see the additional story height. This is because this is at the northern end of the site, so you can see the additional story height and how that relates to neighbouring properties. And it also shows you visually that the scheme design, appearance, etc., remains consistent with the extant permission. Next slide, please, Sava. And then this gives you information about and this is again in the report, these images show you the comparative increase in story heights and their impacts in views from Montague Road on the left-hand side, showing you, firstly on the first image, what the permitted scheme looks like with the red outline, string line, and then what the increase in story height shows you with the extra 2 stories or the single story. And then likewise at the southern end of the site, the junction of Montague Road and Cambridge Road, how the additional 2-story heights appear. And then the next slide, please, Seva.
And with Cambridge Road losing all its light.
And then there is a summary. We have an overall approach which outlines the additional units within the scheme, balanced with the increased number of London affordable rent family units in favour of shared ownership units, but an increase in the number of family shared ownership units, so that there's a general trend within the scheme to favour larger family units within the development not previously proposed. Just noting the fact that the GLA do not require the application to be referred to them. They did not consider it as of strategic importance. The proposal continues to deliver the objectives of site allocation policy hand 3, and not on its merits, therefore on the planning merits. the revised development satisfactorily complies with the development plan and other material considerations. And the reason why I set that out there, Chair, is that although this is a variation of the permission, it is still, if and of itself, a new permission, and therefore the application must still be deemed to comply with the development plan and other material considerations, not just simply an argument or a discussion about whether the changes are material or not. And so turning to the minor material amendments protocol, which I set out in the report and have addressed, this is the Council's own protocol because there are no hard and fast rules set down by government. It's for a local authority to determine what it considers those material matters to be. So the external alterations to blocks A, B and C and the substation, electricity substation relocation are of no more than minor significance. Compared to the extant permission, the impacts on neighbours from the additional storey height are not significantly more harmful than would be found within the extant permission if it was implemented. And the development therefore remains substantially the same in scale and nature as that originally applied for in the extant permission. And that is the test that the planning policy guidance set. And I don't make any comments on the law. I'll leave that to the Council's legal advisor, but that is the key test, as it were, in judging the merits of whether a development is a minor material amendment or not. Then finishing off the conditions changes, they are necessary to a Section 73 application, and they've been dealt with elsewhere in the report. I haven't covered them here, but in essence, they relate to plan numbering and to some changes to wording of noise conditions to reflect current British standards. And the recommendation, therefore, Chair, is to accept this minor material amendment with conditions and following the completion of a new legal agreement. And Chair, before I finish, I would just pick up the point that there is a briefing note, Chair, and that we have received during the course of the day a considerable number of additional representations, which I've set out in the report. And I can also, Chair, that by the beginning of this meeting, I had also received a further 19 email representations in respect of the application. And I would like to just address them briefly, Chair, because they raise a couple of points that I think members need to be aware of. In terms of the merits of the proposal, they repeat for the most part comments that were made by other residents in consideration of the application. And I should first of all note the fact that they urged the committee to reject this application in favour of an application for full planning permission instead, because objectors consider that the amendments go beyond the concept of a minor material amendment. And the other matter, Chair, which I think is of what's of more concern also, is to the belated nature of the receipt of the opportunity to comment on the application, Chair. And I just want to advise the committee, if I can please, that when I received some of these comments today, I immediately went to our admin team and checked. And as I say in the briefing note, Chair, site notices, first of all, the applicant did carry out a pre-application consultation and they received over 100 representations to that. So there was a wide understanding of the proposals in the area. In fact, some over 1,000 pre-application notifications were sent out by them. Then we carried out our own site notification process, Chair, and 33 site notices were posted all around the vicinity of the application site from the 3rd of February rather this year. And indeed, that was in that week also, the site notice was posted in the Gazette. So I am surprised, Chair, that residents in the area consider that this is the first they've heard of it. And I would note in any event, as I do in the report, Chair, that up until the time that the report was prepared, I had actually already received 16 notifications of objection to the application. So I'm bemused, Chair, as to why it has been the case that some residents feel that they have been unaware of the proposals. Of course, we were in a period of lockdown, Chair, during February, but we were also allowed to go out for walk and exercise, and therefore residents in the area would have seen the brightly coloured site notices in the area. I can't explain why 19 further residents consider that they weren't aware of the application, but all I can say to you, Chair, is that as far as officers are concerned, it was properly notified and advertised, and clearly the notification process was working up until that point. That aside, Chair, the recommendation is before you to grant. Thank you. You can close the slides now down, Seva. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, well, we have no speakers this evening, so we will move straight to questions to Greg and the any such other officers as are need be. So Councillor Wall already has his hand up, so use the raise hand button if you've got it, and if that won't work, indicate in the chat. So I'll take Ray Wall and then Greg Stafford. Ray.
Thanks, Chair. Greg, I'm glad you cleared up the one about the difference between a minor amendment in the report as well. There has been a significant amount of objectors saying it should be a full application. I think you've cleared that one up, so I don't need to ask that question. And the consultation was far and wide, and it's been around. I know we were under lockdown, but it's been on Facebook for many weeks now, so it's not as if people didn't know. What I would say is it's not helping cause sending emails after the 7 o'clock start of the meeting. They're not going to be read, and they're not really helpful. The question I've got though, Greg, is a lot of the objections refer to rabbit hutches. It's not the first time we've heard this, and it won't be the last. But I just want you to reiterate, or can you reiterate that all of the homes, not units, I'd rather call them homes, actually abide by the space standards on this?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Councillor Wall, I can confirm that they are compliant. The applicant, A2 Dominion, is a registered provider of social housing, and therefore they have a duty to provide dwellings to modern space standards. And those space standards in general are actually far greater than normally apply to market housing. So the short point is, yes, they are compliant with national space standards.
Thank you, Greg Stafford. And I've got Joanna Dabrowska next, just so you know I've seen her.
Thank you, Chairman. Unlike Councillor Wall, I do find the emails helpful whenever they come in. So I think that's residents need to express their views, and it's always helpful to receive things from residents. I'm less clear on the minor amendment explanation. I tend to agree with the residents who've emailed. I know this is a debate, but could you just run through why this isn't a minor amendment, or what would have tipped it, in the council's view, from being a minor amendment into having to go to a full application? My calculation is about 9% increase in dwellings. Would 10% have tipped it? Where is the tipping point to make it into a full application? Two other questions. Could you tell me how many of the dwellings in the original proposal were single aspect, and how many were north facing, and how many now in the revised proposals are single aspect and or north facing? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, can you respond to those, Greg?
Yes, I can. First of all, with regard to the tipping point, regrettably, there are no hard and fast figures. It's a matter of judgment, which is why Ealing Council produced a protocol. Indeed, and most local authorities in the country do that, because the government did not see fit or necessary to set or prescribe standards or limitations. There is legal authority for what may or may not constitute a minor material amendment. I won't seek to set it out here, Chair. I think I will leave it to our legal colleagues to advise. But the one test was effectively the phrase that I set out in my last screen, and I'll read it out because it's not before you anymore, which is that the development proposed remains substantially the same in scale and nature as that originally applied for in the extant permission. So substantially the same is not defined, but it has been through the courts. And ultimately the court's view is that it's a matter of fact and degree, it's a matter of judgment, and therefore it is before committee tonight to make a judgment that they consider that it is or is not a minor amendment, according to how they judge the extent of the changes themselves. So that discretion, effectively, Chair and Councillor Stafford, rests with the committee to decide at the end of the day. In the report, I've sought to address the scale of changes in terms of the key planning considerations. Percentages are produced in the report. I consider that being largely within single figures and focused in a smaller part of the site, albeit one of the larger buildings, it still makes the scheme compliant in those terms. It is a matter of judgment, but as I say, it's for the committee ultimately to decide whether they consider that change to be material or not. In essence, we're looking at the height of the additional stories added to Block B, because with respect to the rest of the scheme, the external alterations and other factors really are of no great moment. But I repeat, the view of the officers is that that the extent of the changes in the proposal before committee tonight would fall within the ambit of still being substantially the same in scale and nature as that originally applied for, and we are judging the extant permission, of course, as the fallback position in making this judgment as to the differences between the two. With regard to single aspect and north-facing windows, I can't give you a precise number, Councillor, and I will if you would allow me time to check back. But what I will say to you is, because the floors that are being added to Block B are effectively sitting on top of the floors that are already approved. Effectively, what we're doing is in proportionate terms. If there are any, those units which are single aspect north facing are the same in number, and therefore proportionately the same as they are already in the extant permissions. So the short point is there are north facing windows. I can't give you a precise number, but this new extension would naturally increase the number of single aspect north facing windows, but it will obviously also increase the number of dual aspect windows within the scheme. I'm sorry, I can't be more precise in number terms than that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dabrowska. I've got Councillor Rice after that, and then Councillor Anand.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed the planning report doesn't have any page numbers on it, which is rather annoying. But I think on page 35, I'm looking at the sunlight and daylight. The officer put a slideshow earlier, and there was a one page which says which windows were affected. If the officer can put that one up again, so I want to refer to that if possible.
So would you be able to put that put the slideshow back up again, please? I think you need to go back 4, I think.
Yeah, I was right. It's over the end. Yeah.
That's one. I think, isn't it,
okay.
Councillor?
Thank you.
Yeah.
It says here the properties most affected, and it lists the additional windows. Now,
yes.
What I have picked up on, and I think what's missing, unless I've missed it, because the report's quite chunky in terms of lots of words and numbers, and there is no clear position of how many windows have been further affected. So not new ones, those who were affected before in the extant permission, how many have been further worsened or further diminished of having daylight and sunlight. And just to quote here, it says here that the blocks already overshadow each other because of the north-south positions on Bronwell, is it Place? Bronwell Place at the back. It says that it results in them receiving less than optimal sunlight and daylight levels, regardless of development next door. Now, because there are, I'm thinking some of this could be copy and paste from the previous one. So my question is, how many windows have further diminished daylight and sunlight as a result of the extra up to 6 meters extra height?
Extra height, yes. Well, I think that's obviously where this page from the slideshow helps you, Councillor, because I do actually list numerically on that there where it says properties most affected.
But these are additional windows rather than the percentage of, say, a window where only half a window was affected, now the whole window is affected. So this is the full windows. What about the increase of what already had diminished last time?
Yes, I see what you mean. What this does here in effect is it says that there are, if we start with Brownell Place, for example, that in assessing the previous application, a number of properties had windows affected which did or did not comply with BRE guidelines. With the addition of the extra stories, we now have, as I say, there are 6 additional windows of properties at Brownell Place which have an increased impact. Now, VSC is called the vertical sky component. And if I try and sort of simplify that for my sake as much as anybody else's, because this is quite esoteric stuff, but in a way what it does in effect say is that the amount of sunlight that would hit the window of a property if there wasn't a building in the way of it. So as a result of the increased story height, we now have 6 additional windows of flats at Brownell Place. And where we talk about Brownell Place, because the flank of Brownell Place blocks have only small secondary windows in them overlooking the site, it is inevitably the windows of the main rooms, which have this essentially this north-south orientation, that are affected. And because those flats are already intrinsically affected because of the way that they were designed with recessed windows and bays, for example, then they are more significantly affected by the scheme. But I think the key point, the headline point to come away from this is that although the impact on them is worse than it is with the extant permission, nevertheless, where there were other flats that were previously affected, or other rooms that were previously affected in the extant permission, the level of greater impact is still at the same level as the extant permission. So if I put this into a simple way for myself, I think as much as anything, what I'd be saying to you is, if we ignore the extant permission and we were presented today with the scheme that is before you tonight, the level of impacts on the windows of flats that are affected would be generally the same throughout the scheme. So the point being that if you considered in granting permission for the previous scheme that level of impact was acceptable, then the logical conclusion would be to have, if additional windows are affected and their level of impact is the same, then likewise the level of harm that they would suffer would be the same. I hope I got you to where we want to be.
Thank you, officer. Thank you. I just want to come back on that.
Yes.
I'm a logical person. I'm a mathematical person, and with a science sort of background. And I'm trying to understand, because you say the impact of sunlight. If this was, let's say, a brand new application, as in if there was no extant permission in place, that the impact would be the same. Yet at the same time, this reassessment shows additional windows being affected for both the VSC and NSL calculations. So I don't quite buy you're saying there's no impact. And whilst we can't change the past in terms of the north-south nature of, say, Bronwell Place, whilst, we can't change the past other than demolishing it, we can't change it. But the fact is, by adding 2 more stories, you will impact by default because of the orientation of the existing properties and the proposed properties, plus the bulkness, the increased bulkness of the proposal next to a degree very low rise properties around.
Yes, no, I take your point, Councillor, and logic would suggest that that's indeed the case. I think what we also need to bear in mind here, though, is that in measuring impact, the BRE sets a certain standard. So there's a de facto impact, and then there's obviously a continuum of which the impact grows to be so significant as to ultimately block any light or sunlight or daylight reaching a property at all. So you have a continuum of impacts. And what I'm saying there in effect is that as a result of the additional story height, windows that may have been affected previously but were within the acceptable limit of impact are now more affected as a result of the additional story height. But that greater impact is equivalent to what it would have been if we'd have been presented with the application today. So in other words, they've not gone beyond to a greater impact, and that's obviously very important as part of the analysis of whether this is a material amendment or not.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Right, because what I'd just like to clarify, if I may, please, is just on the conditions, please. It mentions there about residential CO2 offsetting and the air quality measures. And I just wondered if we could expand perhaps on what we might anticipate using that money towards, because I'm just quite interested as to what we're going to do in order to make this more environmentally and friendly, because it doesn't actually seem to have very much detail in the report. And the other thing that does concern me is regarding the play space, because it does look like there will be a deficiency in play space for the younger children, and we are talking about putting money into the local parks and the local playground in order to try and compensate for that. So what I do have concerns about is ensuring that the young children especially can play safely, because one problem is, I suppose, if you've got young children wanting to play, having to go across the road to a big playground, they can't really go very easily go on their own, and it becomes very difficult because parents have to accompany children. So you're just wondering, well, to what extent can the spaces that we're wanting to cram them into those playgrounds, into the Elthorne Park, how well can they accommodate all of that? And also the fact that you are going to be having a lot of adults in a playground potentially, and just how really acceptable is that as well, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, I think you were talking about the financial contributions in the recommendation, weren't you, Councillor, on the first question?
Oh,
regard to air quality and CO2. Yeah, sorry, that's okay. No, I just wanted to make sure I was going to answer your question correctly. So with regard to, you said air quality monitoring, I think, didn't you? That's right. It was air quality, wasn't it? Well, that is a standard request of our environmental health department, because obviously the borough is in an air quality management area, as you know. So this is the financial contribution that they want to be put forward as part of their overall management process. That money would then be directed to the environmental health department, and they would use it as they see fit. And I would imagine it probably goes towards such things as purchasing of equipment and other such things in order to manage the area, and also to see how the overall management proposals that the council has are actually performing or not. So that's how that money is directed from that in that particular matter. I think you also asked me about the CO2 offsetting, didn't you? Yes. So what that is the carbon offset, because obviously the overall objective now is to try and achieve zero net carbon for developments, and as a consequence of that, the council takes a financial contribution where an applicant is not able to meet the full obligation or duty on site. And the applicant is doing precisely that in this case. And just so as committee's aware, that increased amount does reflect our new £95 per tonne requirement for applications. So it's not set at the lower level. And in order also to try and deliver those wider obligations, as well as part of the management of the energy, then we also have a condition in the permission, condition 42, which is a whole life cycle carbon assessment condition, which the aim of which is to make sure the applicant drives down carbon capture and recycling within the scheme as part of they have to submit a condition, an application for the approval of that condition, so that we can see that over the lifetime of the development they are moving towards the achievement of those objectives. So there's a stick and a carrot in that, if you like. The stick being you pay a financial contribution and you pay more according to how much of you fall short. And can I say that the shortfall here is within our generally accepted standards, and then we are now employing the life cycle carbon assessment condition, which we've been given by the London Plan, in order to drive down those requirements even further. And then on the last point with regard to play space, Yes, like you, Councillor, I would always prefer younger children's play space to be provided on site if, as and when it can be. And so as part of this development, as I say in the presentation, the 100% of the 0 to 4-year-old play space requirements are met by the scheme, and 75% of the 5 to 11-year-olds are met in the scheme. And what the applicant proposes to do, in effect, is to combine the two areas so that they are still physically discrete, but nevertheless, contiguous with each other. As a result of that, because there was a required increase of 105 square metres of 5 to 11-year-old play space and 0 to 5-year-olds, that has been deducted, as it were, from the communal open space, because, as I said in my presentation, the site has not grown in size to accommodate the additional play space. So the additional shortfall is met by a Section 106 contribution, which is directed towards the two parks opposite the site, and that is consistent with the extant planning permission. Those obligations are currently within the extant permission.
Thank you, Councillor Renand.
Thank you, Chair. My questions have all been addressed, so I'll try and keep. I don't really expect to get a detailed answer again, but I'll just address some.
So your sound is your sound is very, very poor, Councillor Renand. We can't really hear you very well.
Okay, wait. Let me turn my video off.
Well, I think you've got two feeds on there that may be interfering.
No, one's off. I've just got that as a backup.
Right. Okay,
is that better?
That is much better.
I can hear you clearly. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. I've got two questions, but I don't expect a detailed answer as you've already provided. But I'm still very much concerned with the minor and major amendment side, especially when the issue was substantially the same in scale and manner, because I'd like to go back to a screen on the slides which had Cambridge Road, and then I'll take my question from there. Can we go to that screen?
I think, Seva, that if you can open up the view, I think
the next.
I think
no,
two images
no,
at the bottom. The penultimate images. The next one on, please, Seva. I think those are the ones. Those are the ones, aren't they, Councillor?
This one. That's right. No.
That's it.
That's it. Stop. Now, if we look, it says here junction of Cambridge Road and Montague Road. If we look at that last picture.
Yes.
And we look at the second window.
Yes.
And we see the red line. It's actually for that resident. This is a material change. If you look at, I know, and there's negative synergy in here in this situation. We really should be working on positive synergy. Here we've got negative synergy. We can't really go on, in my view, we can't really go proportionately what the impact is, and it would have been the same, because proportionately the impact is not the same. When you look at that picture at the end, that second window is fully covered. You look at the first picture, it's only marginally covered. So these issues, in my view, is not a minor impact, it's a major impact. I mean, without going into too much detail, how would we explain this image here? I know you've gone over the question already, but how would we substantiate ourselves and say that's not a major impact?
Can I just help you there, Councillor? I know you've got another question, but just to answer your question on this one here. Of course, the image you're looking at there is the image from the road. In other words, you're looking at the front of the property. The impact would be to the back of the property, which is on the other side of the image. So this has been superimposed, and the reason it's been done by this is because Jasper Avenue is a gated development, so it isn't possible for the developer to get in there and photograph the images. But let's not forget that between the back of these properties in Montague Road and Cambridge Road, there are a group of properties running along the north-south perimeter of Jasper Avenue and Brownell Place. Before you get to the flats that are there. So they are some distance away from the image that you can see there, and they're also juxtaposed north-south. So you're looking at it in an oblique angle. So all I would say to you there is you're not looking at the side of the house that would be affected. It would be the back, and it would be the bedroom windows that would be affected at that level, not the front.
But
you had another question, Councillor.
well, I won't. The other questions you've already answered. That was about north facing and the test. I
Yes.
still feel that the test is substantially subjective. But just on this question, just to go back on this question. So when you say the windows, so will the proportionately, will the windows at the back be affected in the same manner as we see? So that then there is a material impact. Is that? I understand you said that it's not the front, but at the back the same impact is there. Am I right?
Oh, yes, you're right, Councillor. That clearly it would be that one would have to superimpose that view on the back. So I wasn't suggesting that you misunderstood the image. No, I was just contextualising the image and saying, well, first of all, you're looking at it from the wrong side of the house, and secondly, you've got to bear in mind that it is the block increase in height is some distance away from the site, because you have intervening development on Brownell Place and Jasper Court before you actually reach the site. But nevertheless, you're right that, you know, in terms of standing at the back of your property, that is the view that you would see in some distance away.
So I just need a yes or no. Would that be then just selectively on that picture? Would that house not be materially affected?
Not in my judgment, Chair, which is why I've recommended that accordingly.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't need any more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lauren Wall.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the issue of whether or not this application was considered a full planning application or a minor material amendment. If it had been judged that it should be a full planning application, how exactly would that be making a difference to the way we looked at it tonight, considering that there is an extant planning permission granted already, and we're looking at the difference between that and what's being presented as a new amendment tonight? If it was coming through as a new planning application, it wouldn't actually be a new one, would it? Because there is an extant one. So what would be being done differently? Would the consultation have been being done differently? Would we be being asked to judge this application differently tonight? What would the difference be, please?
In effect, none, Councillor, is the short answer. First of all, because there is a requirement under Section 73, even though it's a variation, you must still process the application as it were a full application, and it must be subject to the rigours of the development plan and other material considerations, which is why the report is necessarily longer than it might be if we were simply dealing with the question of whether the changes in design were significant or not. So the whole of the report effectively is what you would have before you if this was a full planning application. And the second point is that in terms of consultation, it's the policy of this council to treat these applications in the same way as a full application, and to consult in the same way with the local community, so that in effect what has been done in this report is a mirror of what you would have before you if it was presented as a new full planning application. As to the extant permission, of course, that would be part of the judgment that you would have to make as part of the balancing exercise, and that's within the body of the report. But in substance, what you have in this report tonight is exactly the same thing as you would have if it was a full application before you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dubrovska, your hand is up again.
Yes. Thank you. Just got a couple of short questions. One is because Councillor Nand mentioned about views, the impact on certain properties. However, are there any views available from the Jasper and Brunwell side, the northeast side, looking southwest? Because that that view will probably speak 1,000 words. A view like that, so that would be interesting to have and to see the impact on the properties or the view. I want to say the view is protected, but in terms of the impact living in those existing properties. development, or the incremental part of the development. And also my second question is, going back on my previous, is the impact, because what you just said, that yes, we have to look at it as a full planning commission or planning application in its entirety. What does the incremental impact have of the extra floors on the proposed ground floors from the northeast? You know, the northeast sort of indents of the blocks, yeah, the courtyards, so to speak, and you've got the ground floor properties. With the additional 2 floors, does that mean that those flats, the proposed flats, will be affected as well as existing units?
I see. But I think what we'll do is, if I ask Sever if he'd get the slides up again, because I think there might be enough information on them for us to help you with that. So while Sever's doing that, can I just say it was not possible. If you go back one, please, Sever. No,
I've got good spatial awareness, but I think that
louder than words. I know you do. I think I'm doing it for the discussion, really, as much as anything. First of all, it's not possible to enter Jasper Court or Brownell Place because they're gated communities, so it's not possible to get on there and get imagery. You can't even do it with Google Earth. It all has to be done from above. The reason why I've just
sorry, officer, is it possible? Did the developer / planning officer, such as yourself or somebody else from the planning team, actually seek access?
No, I have never sought access, because I considered it possible for me to reach a conclusion on the merits of the application standing in the road, looking through the gate before I was challenged. If I felt that it had been necessary, then I would have had to have made arrangements to do that. The applicant has not done that, and none of the drawing material within the application or the photographic material includes views within it. I've just put this image, asked Sever to put this image up, because this represents probably the best way of visualizing the impact of the two comparatively. So this gives you an impression of the relationship of the new block to the existing flats in Brownell Place, because they're the ones that you can see in the bottom left-hand side of the image. And the purpose of that image also is to contrast the additional story height in the right and left-hand images. So that gives that sense of the greater impact. If you would, Sever, just go back one image, please, to those blocks there. I think that gives you a slightly better view, Councillor Dabrowska, because it gives you an opportunity now in a 3D imaging sense to sort of get a sense of what the relationship is between the respective blocks. Is that helpful?
Well, I mean, but by looking, because I asked Sever earlier if he can put it up so I can sort of judge it.
Yes.
And you know, it would have been a good view to have, as if I were living in one of those blocks, effectively existing blocks, because effectively we're also not looking at what the new occupants will feel. It's about how existing occupants will feel.
Absolutely.
But also, you know, on the right picture, you've got the red arrows, okay?
Yes.
And then let's say, for argument's sake, the middle block, because that one is sort of closed in. The ground floors, which are, say, south facing, but because of, or even the other blocks which are north facing, they don't have much sunlight anyway, or daylight, just through the sheer nature of their orientation.
The proposed blocks, you mean? The proposed blocks?
Yeah, the proposed, the new ones.
Yeah, so you're talking about the impact, so the amenities of the new residents of the development, that's what you're...
So obviously with the extant permission, that meant that it's to some great extent is satisfied and complied with daylight, and it was accepted at that point. Now with the increased 2 floors, how does that impact? I mean, it must diminish the amenity of those ground floor properties. I mean, that's why I think 2 other members on tonight's committee asked about the north facing and a single aspect, because the 2 incremental floors have an incremental impact.
Yes.
So whilst you have listed the windows affected on existing properties, what's the impact on the proposed properties since the extant permission was given?
Yes, indeed, and I can answer that by saying that the applicant's daylight sunlight report also assesses the impact of development on the amenities of the new development as well. They don't confine themselves solely to impact on existing neighbours, and their overall conclusion is that whilst there is a diminution in daylight and sunlight to the new flats, it would still be within acceptable BRE guidelines. Taking account of the fact that some of the flats are north facing and some of the flats are south facing on the ground floor. But don't forget that they are dual aspect as well, the flats on the ground floor, because that goes up through the scheme. So there are dual facing as well as single aspect units.
Did you say the applicant sees it as satisfactory?
That's the recommendation of their
What is your opinion? What is your opinion? Do you feel that the ground floor single aspect properties or the lower floors are more impacted by the increment of the extra floors?
Yes, I do consider that they are impacted. But I take on board the points that the applicant makes in his report. But I would say that two things here. First of all, I would give credit to the applicant to promote a development that would achieve an appropriate and an acceptable residential environment for people moving in there, because, put very simply, if it's unattractive to people and their market units, and don't forget that Block B is primarily a market units flat, then people won't want to buy them. So there is this old thing about the developer and his client, and one must give credit for that. And secondly, I would have to say that because someone will be buying one of those units, that's a judgment that they can make when they're there. Professionally, I tend to give greater prominence to issues about the impact of development on existing neighbours, because I think they are the ones who will live with the development going forward because they're already there. And I normally give primary consideration to impact on existing residents rather than to prospective future residents, because they can, if you like, vote with their feet or with their checkbook if they don't find it acceptable.
I agree on your latter point that yes, more prominence should be given to those existing residents, but also this is the opportunity to be able to make a decision on future developments. So
I agree completely. No, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that we drop our standards just because we don't care about people going in there. Far from it. But I've just turned up the summary of the applicant's daylight sunlight report while we've been talking about that, where they consider the impacts on the proposed development, and that they say that that in general the daylight and sunlight within those courtyard spaces would still be within acceptable limits during summertime periods, but not quite so well lit in the wintertime, which is hardly mind-boggling when one thinks about it at the end of the day. But the key point is that in terms of daylight and sunlight, they still consider them to be within acceptable limits. And I think we have to remember the point that BRE guidelines. I'm going to put my light on because I'm mindful that I'm in the dark here at the moment. Excuse me, I'm just going to get up and do this.
You're on a slideshow at the moment, so we can't see you.
I'm on the slideshow, so you must be able to see me a bit.
We can see you. We could see you a little, Greg. We can see you a little.
Thank you. As much as you want to see. But I think I've explained myself. I've explained the point in several ways, which is at the end of the day, the applicant's professional advisor agrees that the quality of the residential environment is not unduly impacted by the additional storey height, and have no reason to disagree.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other hands asking questions, so we will move to the debate among the committee. Can I see indications of those who wish to participate in debate? Councillor Dabrowska.
Thank you. Hello again. It's because this is the debate section. I just wanted to reiterate what I've been listening to for the past sort of half hour in terms of the Q&A. I still feel that because there is an extant permission there, and whilst the planning process is to deal as a new application, we have to I'm looking at the incremental impact effectively on because the previous permission was given, it's what has the incremental impact been. And I have a feeling, and looking at the 3D and looking at the report highlighting the daylight and sunlight, I feel that the impact is just one step too far on the existing residents, and I'm guiding myself towards refusal. And it's a shame because overall it's not a bad development. It just shouldn't be any more impacting on the local community. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Ray Wall and then Greg Stafford. Ray.
Be brief, Chair, and just want to come back to Councillor Stafford. My point was to send emails while the debate is on. You obviously can't read the emails while we're concentrating on the debate. That was my point, not to ignore people's emails earlier. I've just been listening to the questioning, and the questioning from my point of view is kind of centred around daylight sunlight for existing residents, and should this have had a full planning application or not. I think the officer has told us what difference, which is none, if we had a full application before us tonight. So I think that is really a red herring, to be quite honest. And on the second thing, I think the daylight sunlight report is showing that there is some effect, but it's in some respects it's minimal on the existing neighbours. So the one thing I was going to say though, which is a little bit slightly galling, is the coming back for more. I wouldn't like to see this come back for any more units. They're not units, they're homes. Any more homes to be built on this in the future. I think we've reached the maximum. Should we pass this tonight, and no more is my view. So yes, I don't like the fact that things come back again, but I don't see a planning reason for turning this down this evening. So at the moment during this debate, I'm minded to vote in favour.
Thank you. Greg Stafford.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think from the emails we've received before this meeting, I think it shows, and I think as something that potentially as you as the Vice Chairman, and if the Chairman of the Planning Committee is
so just to pause you, I'm the Vice Chair of the Planning Committee. If you want a Vice Chairman of the Planning Committee, you'll need to find a committee that has Vice Chairman, Greg. But carry on.
I apologise if I assumed a gender of you that you're not. All I was really trying to make the point was that is that clearly during the lockdown, the council's decision to not put neighbour notifications through people's doors has had a significant impact on this. And I think the point that residents are making is if they're limiting the amount of time they go out, they could quite likely have missed this application. So I think that's something that, not necessarily for this planning application, but I do think the council should consider during this continued period of restrictions on our movements. But to get to this application particularly, I was not entirely convinced by the officer's answer as to why he believed this was not this was a minor amendment. I think it's section 96A says that if the change is likely to have amenity, highways or other impacts, increase the size or clearly change the appearance of development or conflict with conditions imposed, etc., etc., it's not minor. And obviously there is an increase in the size. I think if I didn't sit on the previous planning application, but I would have found it quite difficult to vote in favour of that because of the size and the loss of amenity to surrounding properties and roads. And so therefore, in some ways, having listened to this, I think this is a relatively easy one for me to decide on because it's an increase in height and therefore an increase in the loss of amenity to surrounding properties. I think that it should be rejected. And at the moment, unless something wildly different comes out in the rest of this debate, I will be voting to refuse the application.
Thank you very much. I've got Gary Busuttil and then Chris Summers. Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there's been a lot of debate tonight about whether this is a minor or a major amendment to this application. Personally, I think it, as soon as I read the report, I personally thought it was more than just minor amendments, despite all what has been discussed in the questions and in the debate so far. To go from a maximum of 7 stories to 9 stories, personally, to me, in my view, is not a minor amendment and is very much a major amendment. Also, I've noticed in the report in page 20 or 29 is that the increase in dwellings from 333 to 360, so an increase of 27, 18 of those are outright buy. So not much really increase in affordable housing. So basically on that basis, I'm minded to refuse the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Chris Summers.
Yes, I'm going to be extremely brief because Councillor Wall sort of stole my thunder, said, pretty much everything I was going to say. I'd agree with him. I'm minded to vote for it. The only point I was going to make is I was on the previous committee which gave permission for it, but obviously not everybody on the committee tonight have, and it's a shame that we don't have site visits. I hope we go back to them very soon, but I'm minded to agree to vote in favour.
Thank you. Well, of course, we all hope to restore site visits once it's clear that it's safe. I don't have any other hands up at the moment. Does anybody else have a desire to speak before we move to a vote? In that case, well, I say in summing up, I think Councillor Wall made reference, I think members of the committee in the past have indicated, shall we say, concern that there may be Section 73 could be used to achieve increases in scale by stealth. And we would like, obviously, as a committee, to get the applications that people want the first time that they submit them. However, we have to deal with the applications in front of us. As the officer said, there isn't actually a clear legal definition of what minor material means. A cynic might begin to take the view that planning laws were crafted in order to create work for planning lawyers. But luckily, I'm not a cynic. And as Greg Ray also said, ultimately, it's for the committee to take the view as to whether or not what's in front of us is a minor material amendment, and therefore to be dealt with on that basis. And we should consider it in that way. So I'm now going to move to the vote. Before I do that, I need to check that all members of the committee have been present for the entirety of the item. So could anybody who wasn't present for the entirety of the item, please indicate to me now. Okay, we will proceed on the basis that all were present. There were no amendments to the recommendation raised in the debate. Can I check with the Democratic Services Officer that everything is clear? Katie?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to a roll call vote. When I call out your name, please respond by confirming clearly if you'd like to vote for or against, or if you wish to abstain. The roll call vote is as follows. Councillor Shahbaz Ahmed.
For.
Councillor Praveen Anand.
For.
Councillor Gary Busuttil.
Against.
Councillor Joanna Dabrowska.
Against.
Councillor Tariq Mahmood.
For, Chair.
Councillor D. Martin.
Sorry, for, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Aisha Raza.
For, Chair.
Councillor Miriam Rice.
For, Chair.
Councillor Gregory Stafford.
Against.
Councillor Chris Summers.
For.
Councillor Lauren Wall.
No, sorry, can you hear me? For.
Yeah, I called Lauren first.
Oh, did you not hear me? Sorry. Can you hear me now, Chair?
I can hear you in lots of ways, but
For.
Right, thank you. I took that as fours from both the walls. If you can mute now, please, that'd be great. Thank you. I now take my own vote and confirm that I wish to vote in favour. Katie, by my reckoning, that was 10 in favour and 3 against.
Yep, that's correct, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I confirm the application's been approved. That takes us to the end of business for this evening. Thank you to everybody for their participation. The date of the next meeting, at least, well, there is some uncertainty about the future of meetings thanks to government legislation, but the date of the next meeting is scheduled to be Wednesday, the 19th of May, 2021. Thank you, everybody, and stay safe.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Good night.
Good night.